out, but I just wanted to give a little overview of some of the things that we discussed with our students, even perhaps one or two insights that have been gleaned in working with my students about what's worked for them, what hasn't worked so well. I've been a career advisor at Yeshiva University for about 2 years. Beforehand, I had a career in healthcare, so took a different turn, but very much enjoy. I think a common theme is working with people. And I want to spend a bit of time and I'm hoping that, people on this call, if you are brand new to LinkedIn, it's probably not the right place necessarily, although we welcome you nevertheless, and hope there's something for you too. But you're welcome to be in touch individually, and I'll leave, my email is pretty simple, daniel.coleman@yu.edu, and you're welcome to be in touch, and I can try and send some tip sheets for very sort of elementary or rudimentary getting started. So happy to do that. Okay, in the meantime, let's go to our first little slide, which again, welcome to everybody, and wanted just to share. This is our vision. As you can see, I don't have to read the whole thing through, but I did depart from our standard colors of the blue and white, just to point out one particular word which we're spending more and more of our time as advisors and as a career center to think about, and a lot of time with our students as well, to engage them in the process of thinking strategically about their careers. And of course, it's not just students, it's all of us as professionals, to think about where do we want to be in 5 years from now, where do we want to be 6 months from now, and how can we work to make that happen. So we'll come back to the strategy, but just wanted to highlight that already on our very first slide. So when we talk about today's goals or this evening's goals, we want to be able to try and boost our professional online presence, hopefully take away something that we can implement into our practice, or at least begin thinking about, and to get you thinking, right, what might be the next steps in your own career development or networking? What might you need to do? And perhaps it's getting beyond the screen. I tell students sometimes, especially for those among us that count ourselves as more introverted, we are very much excited. We're very much sometimes going down the electronic rabbit hole of the internet. We like to spend a lot of time hanging out there, communicating with people there, but where the action often happens is beyond our screens. Of course, perhaps talking about a slightly different world than the one we've entered in the last 2 months or so, where it's sort of very much an online world. But in general terms, we also want to think about getting beyond that world, and so LinkedIn should never be seen as a substitute. There's kind of a little disclaimer at the beginning for the networking that we do in person, but perhaps LinkedIn can be looked at as one tool in being able to secure some of those face-to-face conversations. Okay, this actually statistic I pulled is actually already over a year old, so I was looking for some more up-to-date ones, but I just pulled some figures just to get a little sense. There's actually right now in the world, if you want to guess, you can put it in the chat how many LinkedIn users there are. But before I reveal that big number, approximately half of them use LinkedIn at least monthly. Right? Suddenly there's people that use it weekly. There's people that might, like myself, that either for personal or professional reasons are on it pretty much every day, maybe multiple times a day, have the app on our phones and interact with people that way too. But it's pretty good for a sort of a social network or any kind of network to have that level of engagement. And that's pretty good. So I see someone put it's actually approaching now 600 million. So someone guessed at 500 million. It's actually even greater. It's now approaching 600 million users. And again, about half of them, close to 300,000 million users, are pretty regular on LinkedIn. Again, over 20,000 companies are using it to recruit individuals to fill vacancies at all different levels of the organization. 80% of LinkedIn members want to have a mentor or be one to others, and that's really important. I gave a very different webinar this time last year to some of our graduates about sort of thinking outside the box in terms of our job search and one of them asked me a great question and said, like, essentially saying, what if I'm not comfortable with doing this, and reaching out to others to ask them to help me out in some ways, or give me a connection, or provide some information. And I said, that's really, that at the time was really the whole function of that webinar back then, was to think a little bit outside the box and to say, yes, sometimes we need to move beyond our comfort zones. For those of us on this call that are Jewish, I'm conscious that that's only about 50-something%, or maybe just under now, of the YU community. We've expanded a lot, and we reflect the diversity in New York, especially with all of our graduate schools. We cater to a very wide audience. I know there are people who are celebrating Ramadan and Eid later this week and this weekend. People celebrating all sorts of things, but for those of us, we're celebrating Shavuot soon, and the next major biblical holiday after that will be Sukkot. And Sukkot is very much, without going into it, but for those that are interested in sort of a Jewish approach, it's very much thinking about going outside the box, going outside of our comfort zones, our usual sort of walls, and going beyond that as well. So sometimes we do have to ask, and the good news is here, 80% are actually very interested, not just in mentoring, but also on the other side. I don't know whether it's a 50-50 split out of those 80%, but certainly there's a lot of people who want to mentor out there, and who are very appreciative or very interested in our outreach to them and willing to help. And that's the feedback that I've had from many of our students. I won't spend too much time on the others, but just, I think, the second to last bullet there, sorry, let me go back 1 second, is 70% of people were hired at a company where they had some connections, right? They created connections with the company, they were known to people at the company, and according to this research, 70% of people actually got a job essentially by networking or by knowing people at a particular company. Okay, so here are some quick ground rules, which is always good to remember. It's somewhat alliterative, so you'll indulge me with that. It is, as we were referencing before, a way to promote ourselves. We shouldn't think that we don't have our place in the world. Everyone has a place in the world. Sometimes we need to let people know about that. We need to get people to buy into what we're selling. Sometimes we're essentially selling ourselves and what we have to offer to a company, and perhaps we'll reference that later. A lot of LinkedIn is how we add value, demonstrating our value, and also adding value to the conversation. Obviously, the conversations should always be polite. It should be pertinent, right? If I'm talking about news that happened like 3 weeks ago, it's not as interesting. It's likely if things that if we post too much information, which is, if you like, old news, people will start perhaps to lose interest in what we have to contribute. So we should always try and be sort of pertinent and timely in our responses and in the conversations we enter. That doesn't mean that if we come across something from a few years ago and we want to reach out to someone about it, we shouldn't do that. But as a sort of, if you like, a general rule, LinkedIn is certainly a very current, very pertinent platform. Professional, it goes without saying. We want to be sort of professional, relates to politeness in our sort of discussions and in what we post. I have to admit, suddenly, if you look at some of my own postings, they are somewhat, some of them are very personal. I'll take a picture, I'm not one of those parents that will never put their kids on social media. I don't do it every day, but when my kid dressed up as me, with his tie on, and he put on glasses, he can only find sunglasses, not regular glasses, but he put it on and stuck himself in front of his computer for his Zoom class. He's 6 years old. I thought that was pretty cute, trying to emulate his dad, who was sitting in the living room on his Zoom calls. I took a picture of that and I posted that a week or two back. And so, we do want to be, that goes to the next one, personalized. It's relates to the professional world that we're living in right now, which is very much online, which is very much being stay at home, or what's the word? Parents that are also homeschooling, if you like, at the same time as trying to work. It's also personal, shows hopefully that I have a fun side, or at least that my 6-year-old has a fun side. And praiseful, I'm not even sure if that's a word, but obviously LinkedIn is a great platform to be able to give praise and to applaud. One of the icons, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, maybe I'll demonstrate in a little bit, but one of the icons is giving praise and applause. So what I want to do is go briefly. I'm going to try and share one of my other slides. And again, if you have questions along the way, I'm going to try and an eye on the chats, and feel free to chime in or put something in the chat. I will try and do it, and also to stop along the way. And sorry, I'm actually just trying to share a different screen. Give me one moment. Okay, let's get back to this. Here we go. Okay, so let's have a quick look at, I've got a few different tabs open. Let's open LinkedIn. I'll open it. It obviously opens to my own profile. I have premium. You don't need premium, but that sort of comes with the territory of our work, that we sort of have that benefit of working in career services and have LinkedIn Premium. We are looking now at some of the quick things that you should make sure you do. Again, thinking about it a bit outside the box, just have a good picture. You don't need a caricature. That's my way of being a little bit different, a little bit outside the box, if you like, and trying something a little bit new. There's no reason not to be experimental, but suddenly have a picture there. And if you're not sure whether your picture's there, you know, make sure you have a spouse or a cousin or someone who's on LinkedIn, and they should look at your profile, but also check in your settings, right? So you go into your settings and just make sure under, edit your profile, just make sure what's checked off under, here you go. Your profile's public visibility, so obviously it's switched on. You've got the basic details. Some people, they would select, maybe they only want their first week connections to see their photos. I would discourage that in general. There may be specific reasons why you would do that, but in general, you want your a good photo out there. It doesn't have to be one that you pay someone hundreds of dollars to take, but it should be professional looking. For myself as a male, not to be too gender specific, but you know, probably a tie is in order. Again, kind of depends on your industry. And for females, again, use your judgment in terms of what business dress is appropriate. I would make it as visible as possible, again, to the largest degree of connections and people who might stumble across your profile, because it adds personality. And it makes it actually, according to LinkedIn statistics, it makes it something like 40 times likelier that people will spend longer in your profile when you have a picture there. And obviously, the better the picture, the longer they're going to spend. So you can look down if there's any other things you want to check off. Generally, over here, I have pretty much everything checked. One quick tip over here: edit your custom URL. I can't tell you how many times I've been in touch with students, and I've said, you know, they've scheduled a meeting with me, you know, to review LinkedIn. So I try, you know, when I have a few minutes in the day or two before the meeting to go onto that profile. But if they haven't sent it to me, sometimes I have trouble finding them. It might be a name, not to pick on any particular names, but let's say the name is John Smith, and there's a lot of John Smiths there, and I don't want to spend the precious time I have between appointments trying to find the correct John Smith. And again, I could narrow down the search, maybe John Smith, Yeshiva University, and so on. But it does help if you've got a specific, if you can, you know, just do a quick edit, do something which is more unique. You can then easily send the link out to someone, and also it makes it more easily discoverable, your particular name, when it comes to sort of a more general, someone else doing a more general LinkedIn search. So again, I'm not going to take you through every setting. We just want to make sure that for those that are wondering, you know, about their profile pictures or about how discoverable they are, those are some quick tips there. Actually, while I'm there, let me just show you one more thing if I can find that under communications. Again, who can reach you? You want to make sure if you're in the job search, if you're in the job market, you want to be able and open to people being able to reach you. So, you know, make sure that those particular settings, and that you can get mail from, again, as wide a variety. You can get messages from as wide a pool of people as possible who want to reach out to you, right? So I've got under here invitations to connect, choose who can connect with you. So I could limit it, only people who appear, I could limit it as such. But again, right now at this point in my life, I don't necessarily want to do that. And there's some other fun features that LinkedIn is rolling out over time, which I would say, again, you can kind of explore in your own time. But there's some fun stuff where you can, you know, set your profile, of course, to employers that you want to make it discoverable that you're in the job market. It won't be known to your boss, but it will be on the back end people who are recruiters and have a special LinkedIn recruiter, it's called. They'll be able to see that. So go, have a look if you're not familiar with all these settings. Have a look through them and see what might be helpful either to activate or potentially deactivate along the way. Let me pause and take a quick breath. So again, if there are some comments, I'm happy to take that. Let me just go back 1 second to my screen. Are you seeing me or are you seeing my LinkedIn profile? I just need to check. Okay, I think we're...
I see you and your LinkedIn profile.
You see both, excellent. And you see everybody else on the screen as well, all the other people who are participating?
I'm just looking at you.
Just looking at me, okay, great. So at least you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, fabulous. Great, so one or two quick things, we talked about joining groups, right? Well, we haven't talked about it yet, I'm sorry. I wanted to mention joining groups, right? In other words, you can search for people, but what I advise if you're interested in a specific industry, so for example, you might be into one of our graduate programs is cybersecurity. So I would advise anyone who is interested, both who is in the field right now or looking for the field, not just to kind of search through all the job postings. And for that, quick tip, as some of you may have already been doing, you can filter according to how recently they were posted. Sometimes when they're a few weeks old, they've already got many applicants already. So sometimes it's good to filter for the most recent. That doesn't mean that something that's old, there's no point in applying, but it might be worth a quick call to the company or email to find out if they are still looking for employers. Sometimes they might have already even closed the position. But what I suggest is joining some groups. Now, there's a lot of groups out there. This happens to be, I guess, a relatively more recent industry, if you like. So there's only, and I say only with sort of speech marks around it, there's only 1,600 groups. And so I tell people sometimes if there's a niche within, like, especially if they're a woman, they might be interested more in the women groups. They might be interested in European. We have suddenly students from all over the world now in our graduate programs and our undergraduate programs. So I sometimes tell people choose one or two that pop out at you, maybe choose one or two big groups, one or two smaller groups. Don't make it your goal. I would not recommend joining like more than, let's say, 6 or 7 groups, at least initially. I think 3 or 4 is fine to begin with. Look for 1 or 2 groups, then maybe you'll go to the second page. You'll join perhaps one group here, maybe it's a little smaller. Well, I'm not in Switzerland, I'm probably not going to join that one. Although maybe if I was going on a trip to Europe and I wanted perhaps to connect with people while I'm there, take a day out of my vacation to go and meet people, I might want to follow that a few weeks before and see, hey, maybe I could dig out some contacts which could be useful for me and just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be in town in a couple of weeks, would love to meet in person. Again, not necessarily talking about or recommending travel at this particular season that we find ourselves in, but just talking in more general terms. Maybe I'd go as far as page 3. Usually I don't go much beyond that, but perhaps, again, here, something European. You can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from Brooklyn. I'm actually born and raised in London, so I sort of immediately just caught my eye European cybersecurity industry. But, for you, it might be North American or Canadian or something like that. So you can obviously refine the search over here. Maybe I just want to do, let's see what comes up if I do Canada. Or perhaps I could do groups and use the search, restricted to particular locations. So there's a lot of fun things I can do here. But the main thing is a little bit like Facebook for those that have it. I don't have it, but I live it vicariously through my wife. And the things that once you're subscribed to these groups, so let's say I'll go on to cybersecurity in Canada, I'll request to join, and then hopefully within a day or two, the moderators will accept my requests. And then the things that they're posting in those groups start to pop up on my feed. It's a great way to keep track of perhaps developments in the industry, especially perhaps regional developments if it's a smaller group, trends in the industry. So this is a nice way to really with little expenditure, if you like, or little effort to connect with some groups. Notice, by the way, I have some wide interests. And I would just point out for now, let me go very quickly onto this Yeshiva University Career Center group. We're actually relaunching It's not just for alumni and current students, where we've relaunched. So it's really a broad group, and we're literally sort of relaunching this week as we speak. It's kind of our summer project. We're going to grow the numbers of people. We're going to invite certainly our graduates and faculty and others to become part of this. And I encourage each of you to take a moment. You're welcome to join this group, and we will try and do our best to post some timely, relevant, and interesting discussions over the coming weeks and months. So just a little shout out for one of our sort of new initiatives. It was an old initiative because it was actually launched a few years ago, but we're relaunching it. It fell into somewhat disuse. And so we're relaunching our Career Center group. Okay, so let me go to back to the chat. Someone was asking me, how should the personal URL be listed? Just going back to taking a little time out because we're halfway through already and I'm keeping an eye on the clock. So I want to provide an opportunity. Sometimes if I leave questions to the end, we run out of time. We may do so anyway, but at least for now, I want to take 2 minutes to ask, if this is somewhat helpful to you so far, and also see if there's other quick questions in the that people want to put in. So in terms of okay, 2 questions. One was, how should the personal URL be listed? So in that, I gave you that example before, right? So if you're going onto your view profile, I might want to go right here, edit public profile and URL. So if I do, I can, well, let's see, let me click on that right now. And here I go. So again, I just put something to make it like a little bit unique and to stand out. Some people like adding a link to their resume. That's a personal choice. Some people like it, on their email signature at the end, whenever they send an email, they append this to their signature. So again, rather than Daniel Coleman 674315, it's a little bit more targeted, a little clear. So hopefully that answered that question. In terms of another question coming through on the chats, excuse me one moment. Let me just read that through. Okay, no found to be responsive. Okay, excellent. So someone asked, okay, let's say I'm doing a lot of work, I'm visiting LinkedIn fairly regularly. I'm reaching out to people, whether they're YU alumni, whether they are people in our circles, connections of connections, and I'm not having much luck reaching out to them. What would you recommend doing next? So that I would say a couple of things. Number one, LinkedIn, again, as sometimes it's worth stating the obvious, is not the only tool in our arsenal, right? It's not the only tool at our disposal. It's a great tool, don't get me wrong. But firstly, I've had people in the past, certainly when I was in healthcare and certainly when I was in leadership in healthcare and in, hiring and building my team, I had people reach out, and they reached out through all different mediums, kind of however they could get to me, or I was trying to be receptive, but when I was directing a large team, and the larger it got, the harder it was to take that time to answer queries, if you like, from the general public, even when they were, fellow alumni of the same institution, or they maybe even were members of the same school, or they knew a good friend of mine, or they knew a former employee of mine. I may have the best of intentions, but life was busy, and I had my kids and everything else, and it just wasn't priority. However, when they reached out again a week or 2 later, I suddenly realized, hey, you know what? I meant to get back to that person. I just didn't get the chance. Clearly, this person is very interested in connecting with me. And you know what? If they're taking the effort to reach out, it's probable that they're not just blanketing, every person they know with like an invitation to connect, or a reason to connect, or a question about having coffee with me, or something of that nature. They're really trying to target myself. And so let me try and respond this time around. But I would also say there were some times when weeks would go by, and I was among that portion of Americans. We saw about 186,000 Americans that are on LinkedIn, but we also saw the statistic that, of LinkedIn users, maybe only 50% of those are on it monthly. And we didn't have a statistic, at least I didn't have it to hand, how many are on it weekly, right? So it could be that people just haven't seen that. So definitely, keep following up, ask and ask again. and use different mediums, right? Just like I said before, right? If you were trying to reach me, Daniel Coleman, I may not have in my profile, let's see if we go back over here, I haven't added in a way to reach me. Perhaps maybe I'm challenging the community to find me. I'm not that hard to find, right? If you just Google YU Career Center, you will find all of our emails listed there. And again, if you know anyone at YU and you know their email, they will pretty much follow. Right now, there isn't more than one Daniel Coleman at YU, so I'm just daniel.coleman@yu.edu, not daniel.coleman, 164. So, be creative. If you're applying to companies and they have a standard email format, you can probably try that avenue. And sometimes I encourage my students, even a hard copy, even a message, right? If you, it sounds old-fashioned, but it goes a long way. People so rarely receive thank you cards or greeting cards, right? Again, right, Shavuot, the Jewish holidays around the corner. For those connecting who either are Muslim or connecting with people in the Muslim community, Ramadan's around the corner. What better way to reach out at this time and just send them, even a physical card. Our post office, thankfully, is still operating, is amazing. Next day, those forever stamps get us there in a day or two. So there are many different ways of connecting with people which are a little outside the box. And the initial approach would be, I would say, you don't necessarily put an ask in the first approach, but you just make contact and say, you may remember me for the past, or just wanted to reach out and wish you well this season, thinking of you, hope to connect in person, or hope to connect in the next week or two at your convenience. So something short and sweet is one way of connecting. I do want to show you, since you brought up sort of our communities, the communities we belong to. So a lot of you already know this, but again, sometimes the obvious is worth sharing. I had a student, without hopefully crossing any bounds, so we have a lot of Chinese students. So she went to, let me see if I can remember it right now. I was speaking to her a couple of weeks ago. She went to Shanghai. Did I spell that right? No, I didn't. Hang on a second. Shanghai University. And here we go. Okay, so she was wondering, where do I even start in terms of trying to reach people in New York? I don't know a soul here. I don't have a shul. She's not Jewish. She doesn't have a synagogue. She doesn't necessarily have a strong, most of our graduates are here on a one-year program. So many of them are very new to America. Some of them were here for were already in the States for undergraduate, but by no means all. So what we did was, together we did an exercise, something very similar to this, where we went on to, who is her community, looking at, what communities am I part of? And one of them is thinking about, who am I an alumna? She had done her undergraduate at this university. So we said, okay, let's look at the alumni community. And we're going to click on alumni. We're going to see, okay, there's about almost 76,000 of them. And now we can drill down a little bit. So unsurprisingly, a good 61,000 of them are in China, but that means a good, if my math serves me correctly, a good 15,000 of them are potentially not in China. And sure enough, here we go. I could do show more. There's some all around the world. But for the purpose of our conversation, I could either look at United States, or let's do just greater New York City area. Let's start on our doorstep. Now, she may not want to speak to every single graduate. She may want a relatively recent perspective, especially if she's in one of our newer degree programs, such as, well, we're about to launch artificial intelligence in a couple of months. We have data analytics, we have cybersecurity, and several others. So let's say she wants us to take the state of the industry. So she may just want to limit her search to people that graduated and have been, perhaps in their first position for a few years. So let's do it from 2000 maybe till we want to rule out perhaps current students. So let's try and do 2015. And so let's see people that are in that. They may not be sort of senior executives, perhaps they are in smaller companies. Excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to take a drink. And now I can see, of course, some of the major companies that they're working for, right? EY, some of the big brand names. And of course, some others as well, which you may or may not recognize. Let's say I'm interested, let's say my ideal is to work for Google. I'm gonna click on Google. And now, from my search terms, Google and Greater New York City area, among the alumni of Shanghai University, I have the following 3 people, which is nice. So I've limited it from 75,000 people, or 76,000 almost, to just 3 people, which is a nice place to start. I think pretty reasonable that within the next week, I could set myself a goal to potentially reach out to all 3. So let's say, just going to click on him, and I might say, okay, software engineer at Google. Wow, that's exactly maybe that's my dream position. Or, you know what, I'm also curious to see what his history is, right? I see, you know what, Alpine Capital, I don't know what that is, but it's interesting, his trajectory. Number one, interesting because maybe it's a company that I hadn't thought about. And maybe that's a place that I might be interested in learning more about. But also I can, you know, in conversation with them say, hey, you know, I see from your LinkedIn profile, I was looking at your trajectory, and it gives you an opening to ask sort of more targeted questions, and certainly to show an interest and engage him or her about their path towards where they are right now. So of course I can connect to them. I might, again, if I'm add a specific note to share that I'm very interested in connecting as a former or another former alum of Shanghai University, and I'd love to connect in the next week or so. Even, you know, I'd love to connect for 20 to 30 minutes in the next week or so. And again, follow up. If you don't get an answer, you can follow up, right? He works at Google, so you could Google him, see what else. Maybe his email is right out there. If it's not on his profile, which it doesn't look like it is here, he is on WeChat, which is kind of like a WhatsApp, but much more, for those who aren't familiar, much more comprehensive. My Chinese students swear by it. They've even, some of them got jobs through it, and suddenly part-time jobs and internships. So like I was referring to before, LinkedIn is not the only sort of modern social channel. We have alumni from Yeshiva College and elsewhere that have got jobs through Facebook and other mediums too. So, so that's a few comments about using that alumni feature. Again, could be from your undergraduate, from your graduate school, but certainly keep looking at opportunities to use the groups that you're a member of. And again, obviously, one group, one big community that we're a member of is the place that we went to, or the places that we have degrees from. We're actually just for the, as a quick aside, a quick relevant aside for YU, our Career Center is very much, like I mentioned, you know, revamping some things and some ideas that we've had in the past in terms of Career Center page as one example, or a Career Center LinkedIn group. We have also, or we are also gradually and strategically putting online various other things to help, especially our current students. So we're actually just beginning to pilot something with our undergrads, which is called YU MVP. So you could go onto yu.edu/MVP. I actually have the tab open over here. I'm just going to flip to it just for a quick second. So really this is kind of hot off the press. We already have something like 200 mentors lined up in a variety of industries. We're looking to grow those industries that are represented there. So for anyone that's interested in volunteering to be a mentor, that means you're not committing to something for life. It's just committing to be like what we might call a flash mentor, right? That if a student has a quick question that they want, or, you know, how do I take the next step? What would you recommend? I see you've been doing this for like 10 years. What might you recommend to me? So it's almost like a mini LinkedIn where the people on the other end have actually opted in, right? They've agreed. And it's not just alumni, it's sort of friends of YU and others. So for those interested in being a volunteer, there's some facts over here. You can be in touch with my colleague Matthew Garcia, or just join YU MVP. You can select, you know, roughly how many times you'd be open to a short call or Zoom conversation, or hopefully in the not too distant future, coffee conversations with students. And for those who are undergraduate students, they can already pilot and see who's in there that they might be interested in reaching out to and picking their brains to get some more information about a particular area of an industry or a particular specialty area. So this is something that's pretty new, and we invite those who wish to and who want to avail themselves of. When will YU, I have a question about when will YU MVP launch for graduate students? That's a good question. Like many pilots, we need some time, obviously, to gauge its success, because obviously it needs, both parts. We're very fortunate to have a lot of great mentors already kind of signed up, and suddenly we're growing that. We want to make sure that they're not sort of overwhelmed. So like any pilot, you kind of start off small and see how it goes. We also want to make sure our students are appropriately and politely, to go back to our sort of polite and professional. We want to make sure that they're appropriate in their outreach to the professionals that have volunteered their time. And then we will evaluate as time goes on to see if this is something that, is well used, is appropriately used, get feedback from the different parties, and then see if we can sort of take it to phase 2. So you're welcome to reach out to me later in the summer. I might refer you to my colleague Matthew, who's doing a lot on the back end, and we could certainly discuss that a little bit more. But I would just say, just an added thing, one of the things we found is, again, because our graduate students, many of them do not have the the undergraduate students do not have the benefit of already a professional network, because they haven't obviously completed their undergraduate studies, so they're not members of like an alumni community already, either on LinkedIn or elsewhere. So this was an added way to help those who are really just starting out and thinking about, more in the career exploration process. Our graduate students, to some degree, are sort of a stage beyond, not that they're in any way in less need necessarily, but the needs are slightly different, right? In terms of career exploration, most of our graduate students come to us, or a lot of them come after some years in industry already, and they're coming for something very specific, like cybersecurity, or data analytics, or speech-language pathology. So there is a different set of needs as well. Okay, I'm conscious of the time, so what I want to do is to perhaps mention one or two quick things, and then begin to wrap up, and also leave some time, of course, at the end for a couple of questions. And I think, want to make sure that we've sort of honored what we started with originally about boosting our professional presence. And I want to just talk for a second about, let me just go back to a profile, about being sort of pertinent and current. It's hard. I want to tell you, even though I'm in this industry, obviously, career services, I have not always been, I sort of, dressed up in some ways the flyer as a LinkedIn guru. I wouldn't, I think maybe perhaps that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's really describing that I suddenly use it a lot. And one of the best ways to, get familiar with any platform is by using it, right? You can obviously ask questions, you can Google. In fact, when I was preparing this webinar, I was Googling some LinkedIn tips, right? What might be good to share? So you can do the same thing. I found this one, for example, and if I go back, I just put in the search for LinkedIn tips, right? So obviously I might not have time in one day to look at all of these, but I sort of scrolled through, I thought, hey, this is interesting. I'm talking about next level. What might this offer me? So in your own time, I would, recommend suddenly you can do the same thing. But my bigger point is I didn't start off by, I didn't always, post on such a regular basis. In fact, what I did was, and this was what I would encourage you in terms of being strategic, think about what is it that I need to do to, to perhaps be a better networker, or to take my networking or to the next level, or to even think about where to go. Maybe I enjoy what I'm doing now, but I also can't see, either financially or for other reasons, I can't see myself doing it forever. How do I want to start searching and seeing what other people are up to who have maybe done something similar to me? Again, that's one of the great benefits of LinkedIn. It will often suggest people that are in a similar industry, but also perhaps other industries that are interested perhaps more broadly, maybe in higher education, or something similar but slightly different. How do I engage with them? How do I think about connecting with them? And one of the biggest ways is not just to say, okay, you know what, that thought comes to me as I'm laying awake in bed, at night, and like the next day I don't really do anything about it, but to actually take some action. And the biggest action, and what I really want to recommend at the moment, we have some great tools out there, some great apps for keeping track of our tasks. And, I'm a big fan of Google and Gmail and setting Gmail reminders. So one of the things I realized that, if I'm going to be presenting webinars or I'm going to be talking to students about LinkedIn, I'd better be become a more frequent user. So around this time last year, I decided, okay, it's one thing to say I want to become a more frequent user, and it's actually another thing to actually become the more frequent user, not just contemplate it. So what I said was, well, what's reasonable given my busy schedule? And I said, you know what, I can do 2 hours a week. Sorry, not 2 hours a week. I say 20 minutes twice a week. I could suddenly find that in my calendar. And when's the best time? Well, maybe just soon after the kids are in bed, before I get stuck on other things, or before I'm watching Netflix or whatever it might be. Let me take, or going to a chavrusa and studying something. What might I want to do? So let me just take 20 minutes, let's say between 8:15 and 8:40 or 8:30 and 8:50 p.m. Twice a week, mark down that time as like holy time, if you like, sacred time in my calendar, to become more active on LinkedIn, to even to think about what might I want to post, and not just think about, but to find and to plan out, what do I want to post in the next week or two, what will be of interest to those that might be looking at my profile, to our students, and so on. And once I did that, and I got those weekly reminders or bi-weekly reminders in my email, and maybe I wasn't perfect, right? Maybe I'd only end up doing it once a week. But over the course of weeks, I became familiar, and those email reminders kept coming. I didn't switch them off. They kept coming in, and twice a week, pretty regularly, I was posting. And then it almost became automatic that sometimes it would be without me even needing those reminders, without me needing to carve out that time specifically on my calendar. I would find, when I had a sort of a 10-minute gap between students, or a student canceled, or whatever it might be, I'd take a few minutes just on my own. It became almost part of my routine, and I'd start posting. And now I'm probably, again, not every week, but probably posting, several times a week. So whatever it is that you want to achieve, think about it. How do I then make it into bite-sized pieces? How do I hold myself accountable to that? And I'm just going to give a very practical example, especially for our graduate students that are on this. I was speaking to a graduate student, I guess about a week ago, and she said that she's from actually from Turkey, and she wants to reach out to YU alumni, and she had actually shortlisted about over 100 alumni that she wanted to reach out to. Now 100, and she put them all in a spreadsheet, which is a great beginning. But 100, at least to me, seems like a bit overwhelming. How am I going to sort of, cut that down into sort of chunk-sized pieces? And what she decided was, to do it a little bit by geography and by company and by industry. And she sort of color-coded. She even showed me the spreadsheet, which I'm actually going to put in the chat now. It's not her spreadsheet, but another one that you could use to keep yourself on target. Here it is. Let me just put that in the chat for anyone that wants. This is one that I had sent to her a while back, and she used it. You can download it. You can edit it according to your own needs. But what she had done is to put it down to, again, have a column on the spreadsheet about when she wants to follow up, so that it wouldn't be more than, and even again, to make calendar reminders to pop up when she wants to follow up with people that she hadn't perhaps heard from in the first go around. She was able to set up, I think, 7 face-to-face meetings before our current COVID-19 crisis hit. And she's now been able to set up a bunch more. She has had a bunch more Zoom meetings and so on. So out of the 100, she saw 100 and something, she had, I think, reached out pretty successfully to 27 of them, either via in-person or Zoom, and she's kind of keeps plugging away through the list and is really making some really great connections and information. So that's just an example of, again, someone, being strategic and not just, going onto LinkedIn and applying for every job that's out there, or going onto the internet, but really trying to leverage and build her connections and contacts. And perhaps more importantly, making a note in her calendar of when she wants to follow up with people, even just to give them an update and say, I so appreciate the conversation we had a few weeks ago. And I would like to, just let you know I've spoken to a couple of other people and it's really helped shape what I'm doing right now, just keeping you up to date, right? Just people really appreciate being appreciated. Let me take a moment to finish a couple of slides, and then we will conclude. Let me just move my screen out of the way, sorry, my Zoom overlay out of the way for a second so I can make this full screen. And here we go. Okay, so here are a couple, we did our ground rules already. Here are a couple of our take-homes and things that we've spoken about. Sorry, I managed to just click out of that. Let me try that one more time. Here we go. Create some value, right? Think about what would be valuable to post. Obviously make it relevant and timely as we talked about it before. How can you add value to conversations that are already going on? How can you perhaps make introductions? Just like, we like it when people introduce us to others. How can we make an introduction for someone else? It's not that everything has to be a quid pro quo, that's a tongue twister, in life. But always think about how we can add value to conversations, and also adding value to our profile, like we talked about, doing something perhaps a little bit different with it. What I encourage every student of YU, if your profile uses, simply uses LinkedIn's algorithm and your headline just says, student at Yeshiva University, that doesn't tell me more than really just seeing the YU logo on your profile does. And you've kind of, wasted that opportunity to use that line to promote yourself by talking about perhaps a unique interest that you may have or what you're passionate about. So think about how you're using and how you're portraying yourself so that it doesn't read as kind of generic. I like generics, don't get me wrong, when it comes to some of my athletic wear or when I come to, the things that I buy in the pharmacy. But in the case of LinkedIn, generics are, if you have a generic profile, that will not be, that's not going to encourage people to spend time on it. We spoke about ask and ask again, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. And if you ask and you don't hear back, keep asking, right? As I put in the line above that, the meek won't inherit the earth, right? Sort of borrowing from perhaps Christian scriptures. I hope no one takes offense on doing that on the Yeshiva University's auspices. But you have to really put yourself out there. And I tell people, certainly in Judaism, that Moses was perhaps the Bible actually says he was the humblest person, the humblest human being, if you like, that walked the face of the earth. And so that prize, if you like, is already taken. So don't think that, you get extra points by being humble. LinkedIn is a time to, and is a place, as its name suggests, LinkedIn. Add some links about some of the projects you've been involved in, or some of the webinars you've given, or the creations, PowerPoint creations, or if you're in the computer science industry, maybe it's to your GitHub profile. Add those links, enrich the lives of others. Just to go back again to number one, creating value, give recommendations to someone. We didn't have time to cover that right now. It's very easy to do with LinkedIn. Get recommendations for those who are students and may have done internships in the past. Get some recommendations from previous supervisors right there on your LinkedIn profile. That goes a long way. And also to remember, networking doesn't stop, right? Just because you've sort of achieved your next step in life, you don't start, you don't stop networking. And I'm going to share with you in just a second some upcoming webinars that are going to talk more about networking. Actually featuring, next week's is actually featuring one of our alumni from our data analytics graduate program who came from China, so really didn't know a soul here, but really did some amazing networking, has a great job at the moment, but hasn't stopped networking. He still says, every week, I'm reaching out to people, to new people. It's not like I'm, thankfully he's in a job, he's not looking for a new one, but he's continuing to grow his network, and that will stand him in very good stead for the future. So your turn. I want to hear a little bit from you. We've really got 1 minute left, but I wanted to spend a second Again, just for those that are interested, you don't have to memorize this, but here are some of our upcoming webinars, including the one I mentioned just next week. And we're going to be continuing throughout the summer to offer various different webinars from different members of our department. If you'd like to hear me again, August 26th, some resume bloopers. So I'll be talking about resumes from hopefully a somewhat humorous perspective, but also obviously with some serious take-homes. And I'd love to hear from you from tonight, just perhaps what was your biggest take-home from this evening? If there's one thing that you may start doing that you haven't done before, or one feature that perhaps I covered that was, obviously LinkedIn has plenty more features, but if there was one that you didn't know about and that you think that you might incorporate for the future, I know we are pretty much out of time, but we'd just love to spend 1 minute, if you can drop it in the chat, or you even want to unmute your microphone, just to hear what was useful for you, and perhaps even to think about, what would you like to hear a presentation about in the future? It might not be part of this webinar series, but perhaps it'll be part of our full series, or a somewhat different forum. So would love to hear a little bit from more of you. We'll also, just to remind you, as you're put something in the chat if there's anything you'd like to end off with, or any burning question that was unanswered tonight. Obviously, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I will try and answer questions there. We have a policy that for our students, we do not accept until they graduate. And that's just partly to manage our networks to, otherwise we'd have sort of another 4,000 or 5,000 students or wherever we're up to in terms of YU enrollment in our network. That can kind of make networks a little unmanageable sometimes. And we want, so we definitely encourage, once people graduate, for them to reach out to us. But for those beyond beyond our YU students, and even for our YU students, they are more than welcome to connect with our YU Career Center LinkedIn page. And just, again, go onto LinkedIn and you will see YU Career Center. We're also hoping to have tonight's slides and recording available at some point in the next week or so. Okay, and I have a few comments. Firstly, a thank you. Always appreciate the thank you. Strategically, someone commented that in terms of updating their profile and searching through groups, that's great. And the first comment was also about thinking again about relevant content, thinking about suggestion, right, posting links, engaging with your audience, and engaging with other people that post interesting things as well. You help them reach a broader audience, so you're actually adding value, because people that see your profile will see, can see at least what you're commenting on. And it's a great way to engage people, especially in this Zoom era. A lot of my colleagues I don't see every day. And I talk about extended colleagues, faculty, deans and others. But in some ways I can follow some of their postings on LinkedIn. I can engage with them without necessarily having to pick up the phone, see what they're interested in, see what they're looking at on LinkedIn, see what's important to them. And it's a great way to be in touch with what's going on perhaps, and what's important for them in their lives. So looks like no further comments at this point, so I'm going to switch off in just 2 minutes. I will remain. This certainly ends the formal recording. You are welcome to, or the formal webinar, you are welcome to disconnect, and I will also stay on for just 1 or 2 more minutes, so that if people do have any quick comments before I leave, you can switch on your mic or drop it in the chat, whatever you prefer. Again, thank you so much for joining this webinar, and hope to see you on future webinars of my colleagues or myself or others as well.